So I want to go back to Interpol. You mentioned that they had talked to you about, I'm going to call it the world's longest pirate hunt. I have a show note in front of me that at one point you received footage from Interpol that showed the murder of 4 men somewhere in the Indian Ocean. Is this the same instance, or is this a different tip from Interpol?
Separate incident. So yeah, different source at Interpol, early stages, guy I've known a long time, ex-military, ex-law enforcement, now was then at Interpol. I told him I was on the market for interesting stuff. He trusts me, so he'll hook me up with good stuff. And he's like, I was actually in Thailand reporting on the sea slavery thing, and I got this email from him. He's a real understated kind of guy. And the email said, brace yourself. And I was like, that's unusual. Like, nothing spooks this guy. And so it was a video, it was a 11-minute video of a slow motion slaughter, anywhere from 9 to 15, depending on your tally, guys that are shot. They're in the water. The guy is firing are on 1, maybe 2, what turned out to be Taiwanese two-long-line vessels, semi-automatic weapons. Turned out after the investigation that these are private maritime security guys working on behalf of the captain. But at one point, one of the captains actually took the gun and hit one of the guys himself. Like the footage is chilling, not just because you see these guys that are kind of trying to get away and they're clinging to what looks like wreckage. It was a dehow that had been rammed. But also because at the end of the video, whoever's filming turns the camera on his buddies and they all sort of rejoice in selfies. They kind of like, this kind of carnal rage over the shooting spree they just had, which is just a new depth of darkness. So I got the video and thought, whoa, this is a great tip, because you've got the culprits or witnesses, you've got footage, you've got clear murder. Those guys are not a threat anymore. They're guys in the water on the ship. These are huge ships. Even if they were pirates, which was the initial BS line I got from law enforcement, they were not a threat at that point. They were just, dudes in the water. So this was like a no-brainer murder of multiple guys on footage, and we got faces of folks who were on scene. And if I did get this, which we did for multiple years, I bet you we could figure out what the ships were, because there are ships in the background. If we could zoom in, we could get their IMO numbers. So we did that. So I started an investigation on that one in the New York Times, put that on the front page, and then stuck with the investigations. And 7 years later, they caught. We stayed involved with law enforcement, et cetera, and ultimately wrote a story after I left the Times for the Washington Post, where the captain had been caught, prosecuted, and sent away for 20 years. And that was sort of the arc of that whole investigation. It took a long time, but a different tip.
What do you think would have happened had media not gotten involved in that and told that story? Do you think it would have just gone unreported?
No, I mean, this is a lob for an alley-oop, sure, I think that journalists matter and we have a good role to play often. In this case, for sure, like that story would not have, it was on the dark web. Some people in the space knew of its existence, but there's no way the Taiwanese prosecutors would have ever taken the case, arrested the guy. I mean, when I was even just, had we only put it on the front page of the New York Times and walked away, it wouldn't have resulted in a prosecution. It's only because we spent the next 4 years banging them the drum and coming back to them and putting stuff out and saying, hey, so you still haven't called the guy in? You know the name of the captain. You haven't questioned him? How is that possible? Well, is that sea and difficult, and he was in international waters, so we don't know we have jurisdiction. These sorts of roundabout questions. But because we stuck with it for multiple years, that ended up in prosecution.
Who does have jurisdiction in international waters?
Good question. Depends on the thing that your jurisdiction over what. A guy gets murdered on the ship. It's the flag state. So if that ship's, it's the flag of the ship. But again, a guy gets murdered 10 feet from the ship in the water. Depends on how he was murdered. If he was murdered by another dude in the water, stabbed in the head, real tough to call that one. If he was murdered by a guy firing a gun on the, see what I'm saying? So it really depends on the thing. If the crime isn't murder, if the crime is you're taking something from the seafloor, like a sunken treasure, also different set of answers. The bigger question that is the umbrella above all of them is, even if you can figure out who has jurisdiction, who's going to actually chase it? Who's going to, that's where you fall off a cliff in terms of outcomes, because no one really, especially when your victims are invisible people, like not an American, or European, but the rest of the global South, say, those nations don't have the money, the investigators, the political will to go after these things. So there's very little chance that there'll be enforcement, even if you can figure out the jurisdiction. And then if it's an American or whatever, you still got to figure out who is going to chase that case. It's not clear what law enforcement means. Interpol doesn't prosecute crimes. They just hand information between agencies. And then who else are you dealing with? Well, the only scenario since you're a rich person, your brother was on a crew, he disappeared, you got money, you hire a PI, you hire, you can buy your way into the game that way.